Hello, students. This is Mrs. Bertuso. I'm coming to you from my own kitchen. Today we're going to be making some pecan bread. Now, the first thing you always do before you cook is wash your hands. And I have just done that. Soapy warm water, 20 to 40 seconds. Get all those germs off before you start making food. So, the way we're going to do this today is we are going to be making use of my bread maker. And so all of our ingredients are going to be going into this container. And then the bread maker is going to do the kneading work for me. I'm going to take it out after it's kneaded and put it in the oven because I like the way that it bakes in my oven better than I do in the bread maker. So everything goes in here. First of all, if you're using a bread maker, you're supposed to put in the liquid ingredients. So we're going to start by putting in 9 ounces of water, and it's a little bit warm. The reason we do that is because we're also going to be adding some yeast, and yeast likes it nice and warm. So 9 ounces of nice warm water. Second thing we're going to add is some oil. Now the actual recipe calls for butter, but I use olive oil instead because it's healthier. It asks for 1 ounce of butter, but 1 ounce of butter is equal to 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So we're going to put 2 tablespoons in here. 1, 2. And then we're going to take our tablespoon and put it into our measuring cup so as not to make a mess all over the counter. All right, our next ingredient is brown sugar. Now you know that there are all kinds of different sugars. Brown sugar is used a lot in bread because it gives it a different kind of flavor. It's a little bit more like maple syrup, perhaps. And what I have in here, according to my recipe, is 1.5 ounces of brown sugar. So we're going to add that to our mixture. The next thing we need is 8.5 ounces of flour. And bread flour is what it asks for, but in these days it's very hard to get flour in general, so we're going to use all-purpose flour, which is just fine. And I've already measured that out. I have it here in my container, and I'm just going to dump that in there. And there we have 8 ounces. 8.5 ounces, I'm sorry. And then we're going to do 4 ounces of whole wheat flour. And what I use is white whole wheat flour. And what that means is that it is made from a different wheat. And so it comes out white rather than a brown color, and it has a slightly different taste. So in order to do that, we're going to take our flour measuring tool, and I'm going to show you how I measure. A lot of people use cups and tablespoons and all of that, and I use a mixture of that and measuring my ingredients by weighing it. And what I have here is a scale, and when I put the ingredients on here, I just turn it on with the bowl on there that I am going to use, and it zeroes it out so that everything I measure is not the bowl, it is simply the ingredients. So let's do that. We're going to put this bowl on there since it was used for flour, and then we're going to hit the tar button, which zeroes everything out. And now we're going to put in some white whole wheat flour. So we're going to measure 4 ounces, and I have a scoop in here just because it's really convenient to be able to do that. And there's 2.7, 3.6, up a little over 4, so we can take a little bit out. 4 exactly. And it makes it so much easier to cook when you're measuring this way because you don't have to try to level anything off or anything like that. So here's our 4 ounces of white whole wheat flour, and that's going to go in just like that. All right, now we need a little bit of salt. This particular recipe again calls for 1 1/4 teaspoons. I don't use that much because I don't use salt much in my cooking at all, but in order for this bread to do what it's supposed to in baking, you need a little bit of salt. So we're going to use just about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And there that goes. And then the final thing we're going to put in this recipe, well, almost the final thing, is pecans. Now it calls for 4 ounces of diced pecans, and what I did was I measured out the whole pecans, and this is what they looked like before I put them in my chopper. So I measured out 4 ounces of this, put them in the chopper, and now they look like this. So we're going to take that 4 ounces of chopped pecans and put it in our recipe. Just bang on it a little bit to get them all out. They like to stick. All right. So now, can you guess what the very last ingredient in bread is? I'm going to tell you. It is yeast. Yeast is the magical ingredient in bread. And you know that yeast is something living. And actually it has a life that creates breads that are very special. Whenever they used to make bread back in the Old Testament days, a lot of times they used what they called unleavened bread, and that bread did not have yeast, and so it stayed flat. But if you put yeast in bread, it causes the bread to rise and be fluffy. The reason that happens is because the yeast reacts with the sugar and the warm water in the bread, and it causes a gas to escape, which makes the bread rise, and it causes your bread to have little tiny holes all in it. So we definitely are going to need the yeast for this bread, because if we didn't put yeast in, we would get a very dense flat bread rather than the one that's going to rise up and be really delicious like we want. So this recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of yeast. 1, 2. All right. And now it is ready for the bread machine, and it will take about 45 minutes for the bread machine to do the kneading, and then we will take it back out and take a look at it and see what it looks like when it's ready for its final rising. So I will be back with you when it is time for that to happen. Okay, so we're back, and the bread has now been mixed by the bread maker, and I had it on the dough cycle so it doesn't bake, but it looks pretty good right now. But we're going to put it in another pan and let it rise again for a few minutes before we put it in to bake. So we're going to start by having this pan ready, and it has a little bit of olive oil in it, as you can see. And then I'm going to dump this bread out on the counter, and I had a little flour on there so that it doesn't stick. I'm going to take that bread. I'm sorry you cannot see the bread as well as I would like for you to, but I'm just going to take it and gently roll it around in my hands to make a loaf. There it is. And then we are going to put it in the other pan. Now, I've got the oven on, so it's going to warm up the kitchen. And that means that we will have some second raised bread here ready to go in the oven in just a few minutes. So I'll be back with you then so that we can see what happens next. So it's been a few minutes and you can see how beautifully this loaf has risen. We're now going to put it in the oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. And I will get to enjoy the smell of it as it cooks. I'm sorry you can't do that, but you'll get to look at it when it comes out. So be back with you in about 30. Okay, so it's time to get the bread out of the oven. So let's see what we made. Smells delicious. Look, golden brown. Oh, so yummy. So I'll probably be having this for dinner tonight. And Sophie, my dog, loves bread, so she'll be right there looking for a scrap. So until next time, I will see you and keep being healthy.